Okay, so let's dive in. We're talking October 1962. 13 days.
Yeah.
Right? The whole world felt like it was holding its breath.
Absolutely. The Cuban Missile Crisis, it dominated everything. All eyes were, glued to Kennedy and Khrushchev doing that whole diplomatic dance.
Yeah, that high-stakes tightrope walk.
Hmm.
But here's the thing not many people knew about then, or maybe even now. Beneath the Atlantic waves,
Yeah.
there was this other drama unfolding, just as critical.
Completely hidden. And that's what we're focusing on today, isn't it? This story of the Soviet submarine B-59.
Exactly. And specifically, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, his actions, or maybe inaction in a way, might have, saved everything.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it. So you have the big picture, the U.S. Navy setting up that quarantine around Cuba, basically a blockade, right?
Right, trying to stop more Soviet missiles getting in.
But what they didn't know, or at least didn't fully grasp, was that several Soviet subs, these Foxtrot-class ones like B-59, were already there.
And crucially,
they were carrying nuclear torpedoes, special weapons, they called them.
wow. So you've got this intense diplomacy happening up top, and meanwhile, these submarines with nuclear capability are just lurking down there.
Yeah, the stakes were sky high on the surface, but maybe even higher underneath, just hidden from view.
Okay, so the U.S. Navy finds these subs. What happens then?
Well, they locate them, including B-59, but again, they don't know about the nuclear torpedoes, so they start using these signaling depth charges.
Signaling. So not meant to destroy them.
No, not at all. The idea was just to rattle them a bit, force them to surface so they could be identified. Standard procedure, kind of.
But inside B-59, things were, they weren't standard at all, were they?
Far from it. Conditions inside that submarine were becoming, frankly, hellish.
Describe that for us. What was it like?
Okay, so picture this steel tube deep underwater. Their batteries were running critically low. That's bad news on a diesel sub.
Right, you need power.
Exactly. And the air conditioning had failed, so the heat inside was becoming unbearable. We're talking extreme temperatures, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe much higher in some compartments.
Just stifling. And the air quality.
That was maybe even worse. Carbon dioxide levels were soaring. Dangerously high. It affects your thinking, your judgment. People were reportedly fainting.
So they're trapped, they're roasting, they can barely breathe properly.
And critically, they're completely isolated. B-59 hadn't been able to contact Moscow for days. They were too deep to monitor most radio traffic effectively.
So they have no real idea what's happening in the wider world, whether war had actually broken out?
Pretty much. They're operating in the dark, literally and figuratively. Fragmented information, mounting fear, and these awful physical conditions.
Okay, so that's the context when the U.S. Navy starts dropping depth charges nearby.
Exactly, and this is where the misinterpretation happens. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, and the political officer on board, they hear these explosions going off around their hull.
Given everything else, what do they think?
They think it's begun. They think they're under attack, that war has started. I mean, under those conditions, with no contrary information.
You can almost see why they jumped to that conclusion. Almost.
So, based on that belief that they were under attack in a full-blown war, they made the decision. Arm the nuclear torpedo. Prepare to launch.
Wow. The weight of that. Firing a nuclear weapon from a submarine, based on that assumption.
Terrifying. But here's the crucial part of the story. Soviet protocol, at least for this flotilla and this type of weapon, was different.
How so?
It required the unanimous agreement of 3 senior officers on board to launch that nuclear torpedo. The captain, Savitsky, the political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, and the flotilla chief of staff who happened to be on B-59 for this mission.
And that was Vasily Arkhipov?
That was Vasily Arkhipov. He was effectively second in command on that specific boat, but also held this broader command role for the flotilla.
So Savitsky and the political officer agree. Launch. What does Arkhipov do?
He says no.
Just no.
He disagreed. He refused to give his authorization. Now imagine that scene. The heat, the stress, the CO2 messing with everyone's head, the captain ordering the launch, the political officer agreeing, and Arkhipov stands firm.
He must have been under incredible pressure. The captain must have been furious.
Reports say Savitsky was absolutely livid. There were apparently heated arguments. Arkhipov argued they weren't under direct attack, that the depth charges were signals that they needed to surface and get orders. He kept his cool somehow.
That's just incredible. That level of calm reasoning under that kind of duress.
Singular courage, it's been called. And somehow he persuaded Savitsky. He convinced the captain to surface the submarine and try to contact Moscow.
And that decision, that single refusal based on his assessment.
It almost certainly prevented World War III. If that torpedo had been launched, even as a tactical weapon against a U.S. ship,
The U.S. response would have been massive. Escalation would have been almost guaranteed.
full-scale nuclear exchange, it's hard to see how it wouldn't have led to that. Archipov's refusal averted catastrophe.
And all this was happening while Kennedy was making his public announcements. The military was on high alert. The world was watching Cuba. But this potentially bigger flashpoint was hidden beneath the waves.
Completely unknown at the time. And of course, later we learned about the secret deal, right? The U.S. quietly agreeing to pull its missiles out of Turkey later on in exchange for the Soviets pulling theirs from Cuba.
Right, the diplomatic solution eventually worked. But the B-59 incident really highlights something else, doesn't it? This human factor.
Oh, massively. We focus so much on the technology, the strategy, the doctrines, but this shows that ultimately the decision to push the button or not push it can come down to individuals.
Individuals under unimaginable stress, far from the White House or the Kremlin.
Exactly. Savitsky and Maslenikov weren't irrational monsters. They were officers under extreme physical and psychological duress, cut off, genuinely believing they were in a fight for survival.
Their decision to fire makes a terrifying kind of sense in their context.
It does. And it was only Archipov's dissent, which was possible because of that specific Soviet protocol needing his unique agreement as flotilla commander. That was the safeguard.
An accidental safeguard, almost. It wasn't designed for this necessarily, but it worked.
It worked because Arkhipov had the character and the judgment to use the authority he had. The fate of the world, quite literally, might have rested on his shoulders in that moment.
It also speaks volumes about the fog of war, doesn't it? The lack of information.
Definitely. There was this critical asymmetry of knowledge. The U.S. Navy had absolutely no idea B-59 had a nuclear torpedo on board when they were dropping those signaling charges.
If they had known,
Yeah.
well, maybe they wouldn't have dropped them. Or maybe they would have acted differently. It's hard to say.
Impossible to know. But that ignorance on the U.S. side was a huge factor.
And on the other side, as we said, the B-59 crew, because they were cut off and suffering, totally misinterpreted those U.S. actions.
They saw signals as attacks. They saw standard procedure as the start of Armageddon.
So you have this mutual ignorance, these misread signals, these extreme conditions. It created this chillingly perilous environment.
Just ripe for accidental nuclear war. It wasn't about deliberate first strikes necessarily, but about stumbling into catastrophe through miscalculation and lack of communication.
It really shows just how close we came, far closer than most people realized at the time, based just on the news about Cuba.
That B-59 incident adds a whole other layer of danger to the crisis, a hidden layer.
So wrapping this up, the key takeaway really seems to be about the power and the potential danger of individual action in these high-stakes moments.
Yeah, Vasily Arkhipov. One person, under conditions most of us can't even imagine, facing down his commanding officer, sticking to his assessment.
And preventing a global catastrophe. His courage, his calm judgment. It was the final unexpected check in the system.
It really makes you think about that human factor, doesn't it? We rely on technology, on protocols, on treaties.
But sometimes it comes down to the judgment, the character, the decision of a single human being, maybe deep underwater, maybe in a missile silo somewhere.
And their actions, their choices, can ripple outwards with just unimaginable consequences. It's not just about the leaders making grand pronouncements.
No, it's also about the people on the ground or under the sea, implementing or not implementing those orders under immense pressure.
It's quite a thought.
It really is, and it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How many other moments like this might have happened throughout history? Close calls, near misses that we just don't know about.
Where maybe one person's decision, one moment of doubt or clarity steered things away from disaster without anyone ever realizing.
It's a pretty sobering thought to leave people with. The immense responsibility and the potential impact that can fall on just one individual when everything is on the line.